So we're going to talk about the Battle of Talikota in 1665. We are here in one of the many temples in Hampi that have survived, but by first British and then government decree is not being used as a temple. So it's a nice setting, of course, for talking about the history of Vijayanagar. So the story that most people have learned is that, which you find in older histories, looks like R.C. Majumdar's story of Indian civilization. You would know that the battle was between the Vijayanagar Empire under Ayodhya Ramaraja and coalition of 5 Muslim sultanates from the Deccan. And Ayodhya Ramaraja was winning the war, was winning the battle, but 2 of his Muslim regiments saw the defeat of the Muslim pole in the battle about to happen, and then they defected, they changed sides. And they started to fight against Ayodhya Ramaraja. So, and the result is that the Muslim side won, that the Vijayanagar Empire was completely defeated, that the army deserted, tried to hold the capital, that didn't last. And so the dynasty continued in a small little province of the empire, which on the whole was lost. So this battle has become the paradigm, the example par excellence of Muslim treason. Now, a lot of effort is being made nowadays to deny that. You just look up the Wikipedia entry on the Battle of Talikota, and you will see that this story of the defection is hardly even told, and much ink is being spent on denying that there is any communal angle to it. And so this invokes names like Richard Eaton, like Romeo Thapar, like William Dalrymple. Okay, let's consider their case. So the Wikipedia article invokes primary sources. Mind you, Wikipedia is precisely used all the time by people who want to save themselves the trouble of looking at primary sources. And so I can assure you that the primary sources have a different story to tell than the Wikipedia version. Note, first of all, that none of these primary sources gives the Hindu version. There are 5 different Muslim chronicles. There are 2 Portuguese chronicles. And then there is also a travelogue by some Phoenician merchant. And they tell the story of a clash of civilizations. This is especially true for the Muslim sources, which see world history in terms of a clash of civilization. So they deplore whenever Muslims fight among each other. They call that fitna, disorder, meaning the civil war against people who ought to stand together. And so whenever they see a battle between Muslims and non-Muslims, they see that as a paradigm of the worldwide jihad that's inevitably going to end with world rule by Islam alone. So that these Muslim members of the army defected and walked over to the Muslim side is an entirely normal phenomenon according to this view of history. Yeah, at some point you see Muslims may be deluded for a while. You see they may have been bought over by the conciliatory policies of Ayodhya Ramaraja. But ultimately, you see, when the issue becomes clear, And it became very clear when the Muslim army was almost being defeated. Then, of course, they remembered their Muslim duty, and so they sided with the Muslim camp. This is a scene you find regularly in Indian history, also on a much smaller scale. Like, for instance, in stories of the partition, people who lived through the partition, this is an endless refrain. It always comes back. Yes, you see, my neighbors had assured me, oh, no, here nothing will happen. I will see to it that you are in safety and so on. And then when the trouble started, those neighbors were the first one who would attack them. So here what you have is these Muslim regiments. Now, first of all, how did they end up in the Vijayanagar army? They benefited from the secularist policy of the Vijayanagar Empire at that time. So when they started with Hakka and Ukka, who had been forcibly converted to Islam and very consciously came back and were acutely aware of the Indo-Muslim conflict, so then they proudly positioned themselves as a Hindu stronghold. But over the years, that changed, and so they became secular, and they entered Muslim forces into their army. This, in fact, is what is happening in India at the moment. Sardar Patel, after independence, had seen to it that no Muslims would be enlisted in the army. And so now, gradually, also under the BJP, this distrust of Muslim soldiers is giving way to the usual secularist policy. So back then, the same thing. So you had Muslim units in the army. It was much easier for them also to defect than it is still is today, because now individual Muslim soldiers are mixed with the Hindu soldiers. Whereas back then you had Muslim units in the army that could coherently fight and set their targets for fighting. So that made it a lot easier. At any rate, the secularist aspect is what led to the Vijayanagar's downfall. Interestingly, the people who want to minimize or deny the religious aspect, they are the ones who use as argument the fact that court life in Vijayanagar had been seriously influenced by Persian court life. Like, for instance, the term Surat Rana is a Sanskritization of the Arabic word Sultan, which means authority. And this happens in many more Hindu kingdoms at the time. The Persian influence was strong, was everywhere, like English today. And you find the same thing in very consciously Hindu empires, like the Maratha Empire. You see, what is Veer Savarkar's book about the Maratha Empire called? Hindu Padishah. So the Padishah is a Persian term in which you recognize the word Shah, meaning king, from ancient Persian. Kshatrapa, the protector of a political domain or a state. So this means sovereignty for them, but in the case of the Mughal Empire, it means Mughal Empire means sovereignty, but sovereignty within a Muslim spirit. So, and other terms like divan or like Wazir-e-Azam, prime minister and so on, they were freely used in the administration of Hindu empires also. Now, what does that prove? You see that influence was very strong. And then what? You see that makes no end to the religious fervor on both sides. You can see the reverse now in Muslim states that use a lot of English terminology in the administration of the Islamic Republic of Iran, for example. And so what? You see, that doesn't disprove the religious character of that regime. So the secularists and their eminent historians try to play up these very marginal factors that throw some fog around this clear-cut religious division. Then another name that you will see in this article is Richard Keetle. You see, right now, really the most important influence on the secularist discourse about communal cognition. Richard Keetle, octogenarian veteran historian from the United States, self-described Marxist, is welcomed by the secularists as a savior from their own discomfiture during and after the Ayodhya. You see, there the so-called eminent historians had said for years that there was no temple. The idea of a temple underneath the Babri Masjid was fictitious. And the first story they gave was that it was a British concoction. Now, this is not even logic. We have to verify it historically. But on the face of it, what strikes is that it's not even logical. Why would the British concoct a story of a mosque built on a temple when, in fact, there are thousands of mosques visibly built on temples? You don't even have to do any archaeological digging. You don't have to go through the records and so on. The Kashi Vishwanath temple and the Aurangzeb's mosque in Kashi really show it. The mosque has a lot of temple architecture in it, which is very purposely done, namely to show the victory over paganism. So you see that story about British concoction, that was fairly soon given up. But then they had the other story of a Hindu Dwappa. That too failed because there had already been established centuries ago a consensus that this mosque was built in forcible replacement of a temple. Indeed, in the years 1885-86, there had been a trial, and some local Hindus did claim the site back already at that time. And all the disputing parties, including the local Muslims and including the British judge, accepted, yes, of course, there was a temple there, but ruled the British judge, since that was centuries ago, it's a pity and so on. Yes, it's not just, but since it's so long ago, it's too late to remedy it. So the evidence was already there. Anyway, you see, the Chandrasekhar government in 1990-91 organized the scholars' debate. And so that prompted the scholars on the Hindu side to collect more evidence, to go through the archives and find more signs of it, then to check what had been dug up archaeologically. So in the 70s, the great archaeologist B.B. Lal had been digging there, had found the basis of a temple, and had been told by Indira Gandhi never to divulge anything about what he had found because she didn't like to support calls of Hindu displeasure. Okay, then certain events happened, the demolition and so on. For a while, nothing. But then the Uttar Pradesh High Court decided to look into the evidence. And so they found all the evidence that the scholars had already gathered. Like, for example, you have Muslim documents, like, for instance, taxation records, in which the mosque is described as a Masjid-i Janmastan. So the Muslim sources themselves, including the managers of the mosque admit in so many verses that this was built on what is accepted by Hindus as the birth. We even have some documents that have been tampered with. Like one mention of the Masjid Janmastan, the word Janmastan is crossed out. But fortunately, of that same document, there was a second copy in another library where you can see the original. So you can see, all means are good to put Hindus in the wrong. But so the court saw this, and there's really plenty of evidence to get really at the bottom of it. They ordered excavations. You see, before that, you could only excavate around the mosque. Now that the mosque was gone, you could just have complete excavation. 2003. And these, of course, found all kinds of temple remains. Not the only one. So you have Bibi Lal's excavations in the 70s. You have these excavations in 2003. Further, after the demolition in 1992, also many temple objects had come to light. And then finally, when the whole quest for evidence was already over, when nobody was looking for evidence anymore, when they started finally building the temple in 2021, when a building company starts digging to make way for a new building, often they find all kinds of archaeologically interesting things. Well, they found more temple evidence. Okay? So there's plenty of evidence. Now, given the wealth of evidence, the judges wondered, how come that these august historians have all the time consistently denied that there was a temple there? So they called the eminences to the witness stand. Only the really big names like Romila Thapa and like Irfan Habib, they escaped. But the lower ones came to tell their story. This is documented in detail in Meenakshi Jai's two books about the Ayodhya. So they came to the witness stand, and then they stammered, but I don't really know. I am not an archaeologist. Oh, and I've never been to Ayodhya. Yeah, I only signed because all my colleagues were signed. So you see, this anti-tempered evidence that these historians were going so strong about, that was also accepted and reproduced by Indologists all over the world, including in Holland Peter van der Veer, who had found evidence for the temple himself, and then under the influence of the new orthodoxy, suddenly denied that there had been a temple. Okay, so they all followed it, and yet that evidence did not exist. Turned out not it. So the secularist historians have become a little bit more careful. You see, of course, they have made sure that their friendly media would not let out a word about their own defeat. But at least they themselves know. And so they've changed their rhetoric. And they use the thesis by Richard Eaton, almost, which is that, you see, there was nothing political about, nothing religious about it. It was only political. What does that mean? First of all, that's a Christian notion of religion. With Christianity, you have a separation between the church and the state. Already since the Roman Empire, the Christians were a powerless little sect in this big empire, so they had no choice but to follow the laws of the state. Unlike Islam, where you have, from the beginning, the idea of a separate state with a separate law system. But so in Christianity, you have this separation, and therefore you often get this rhetoric of, oh, no, it's not religious, it's only political. Now, what does that mean? You see, political power for whom? And then again, for whom? Well, for this particular religious group, of course. So you're just back at the theme of religion. And in Islam, it's even far more clear. Of course, Islam was to establish a state. or to, when conquering, wants to extend its state power. Okay. Now, to make it a bit more convincing, Eaton brings in the fact that there are a few cases, not the tens of thousands of cases of temple destruction by Muslims, but there are a few cases of not really temple destruction. There's, I think, only one case. But there are a few dozen cases of the abduction of the idol. This you also have in Mesopotamia, even in ancient Israel. Let me first give you that example of ancient Israel. In the beginning, when there was no temple yet, Allah was worshipped to attend to the symbol, and that was abducted by their enemies, the Philistines. But then, according to the Bible, it's of course a not very neutral source. Anyway, they give a certain version that is quite interesting. Accidents started to happen within the building where this, well, let's say, murti of Allah was kept. Now, of course, Allah, Jehovah, of course, is not supposed to have a murti. Anyway, there was something that represented him. And so, you see, things started happening to their own murtis. And so they said, this God, that we abducted seems to be quite powerful. We should get rid of it. And so then they negotiate with the Israelites here. Let's give this back, and we'll even pay some compensation. Why? Because they really wanted to get back into the favor of this apparently very powerful God. All right, so they take God seriously. It's not that they want to destroy your religion. No, you see, they want to just show off their power by grabbing the murti of the enemy. Now, what happens with Islam is something totally different. You see, when Mahmoud Ghaznavi destroyed the Somnath temple, it was not just for this idol. In fact, they couldn't do anything with the idol. He destroyed the idol. And the bits and pieces, they could be taken along by his men to put into the, underneath the steps or in laboratories and so on, to just dishonor them as thoroughly as possible. And then the temple was also destroyed, of course, which had no value that you could do anything with. It's just stored. Nevertheless, it was Hindu, and so it was destroyed. So what they want to destroy is not just a statue. They certainly don't want to steal it. They don't care for stealing it. They destroy it. And that object is not the most important thing. What they are fighting against is not some object, is the religion of Hinduism. And so that's the difference with these few cases where Hindu kings abducted idols. Okay, let's say, you see, you fight your enemy in his main temple in his capital city. There's a big statue of Shiva. You take that statue, take it home with you, you install it in your own temple. Then what happens? Now, first of all, you install it in your own temple to continue the worship of Shiva. And in the other place where the murti is gone, well, the priest is perfectly at liberty to reinstall another statue of Shiva. So for the cult of Shiva, it makes no difference at all. There's just this object that changes hands. And moreover, there are no Hindu scriptures where they encourage stealing murtis, where they give the commandment, go steal murtis. You see, even though it happened in Hinduism, it was still a sin. It was still not what you're supposed to do. But yes, it happened. But it had a completely different status than what Muslim rulers. Moreover, Eaton claims, and now many Indian history books repeat, that Muslims only did what they did in imitation of what Hindu kings had done before. Now, I mean, where do these secularists keep getting it? I mean, everything they say and write about the communal issue is just so wrong. Why? Because being secularists, they just don't understand the religious mind. And so they project their own limited, petty concerns upon it. These Muslim invaders would never have imitated it. The Hindu kings were evil. You see, they represented and propagated an evil religion. They wanted nothing to do with it. And then that's what you say, just logical. You see, these counts have happened. Now, when you take the trouble of going to the sources, there is not one case, and all these secularist historians fail to find one. There is not one case of a Muslim who says, yes, I destroyed all these temples, and I did that because this Hindu king 100 years ago did the same things. That is absolutely impossible. By contrast, where they do take the trouble of just justifying what they have done, they cite Islamic examples, like the Somnath temple being destroyed by Muhammad and so on, and ultimately the example of Muhammad. So when Muhammad has conquered Mecca, he goes to the main sacred site, the Kaaba, and with his own hands, he destroys the 360 murtis that are. And so that example is always cited by Muslim law. I did it because Muhammad did it. And indeed, in Islamic law, there is no greater authority than the example by the Prophet. So they didn't need any other justification. Like, for example, there is this Iraqi Shiite preacher who went to Gilgit and Baltistan. Now, this is a very empty area, with very few temples. Nevertheless, in his career, he destroyed a few hundreds of temples. Interestingly, according to Richard Eaton, there are in the whole of the subcontinent, in more than 1,000 years of history, only 80 cases of it. Now, there in the empty region of Gilgit and Baltistan, in a single preacher's career, there are already more than 80 cases. And he effectively quotes as his justification the behavior by Muhammad. As for these 80 cases, you see that also is being thrown around. So, as you must have heard, a small sample of the total number of destructions was brought together, was listed by Sitaram Goel in his 1990 book, Hindu Temples, What Happened to Them? Let the beyond witnesses. So there he gives about 1,900 examples, which is very few, is a very small sample. Like he gives only a handful in Kerala. Recently a book has been written about the temple destruction in Kerala, and again you see, even though Kerala was mostly spared, but only Tipu Sultan already destroyed hundreds. So, to some extent, with this 80 estimate, Eaton is right, because 80 doesn't mean. You see, one of his 80 cases is the army started by Muhammad Shori, Bakhtiar Khilji, and so on. Those who conquer the whole Gangetic Plain during 1992. So they destroy all the temples of Varanasi, 1,000 temples of Varanasi. That's one of the cases. So one case for Eaton in reality means 1,000 temples. So 80 doesn't mean 80, and his estimate already comes a bit more closely to the real figure. Anyway, so there you have an effort both to minimize the fact of the temple destruction, and also to minimize the Islamic character, the Islamic motive of the temple destruction. Whereas this is quite obvious. So the explaining away of the role of Islamic treachery in the Battle of Talikota is just one of many cases of what I have called negationism. This is a French term, Negationism, which is used for the denial of the Holocaust. Now, the status of the Holocaust in European history is different from the status of all the Islamic destructions. I don't like it if I hear you say about, the Hindu Holocaust. You see, it's just different in nature. The Holocaust for Nazi Germany was a very intense affair, carried out in secrecy. It's also pretty unique, because the Germans' public opinion wouldn't tolerate it. So SS elite boards that busied itself with this. And the idea was to totally destroy the Jewish people, children included. And so there was no way of escape. Like Christian converting to Christianity, that didn't count. So that thing you don't have in India. Well, you could always escape. Maybe not in the heat of battle, but otherwise you could always escape, namely you could convert. And so there are many cases where people convert, not even at knife point, but in all kinds of social situations where it is an advantage to be Muslim. Like, for instance, in court cases, if you had some business dispute with your neighbor, well, if you were both Hindus and one of you converted to Islam, that one would automatically win the case. So it was always an advantage to be a Muslim, which incidentally reminds me of this strange projection of American equations onto India. You see, in America, the blacks are somewhat privileged, affirmative action, and this is justify injustice that they have suffered. Now, whether this policy of affirmative action is a good solution, that can be debated. In fact, right now in the Supreme Court, it is being debated. But the historical fact of oppression of the blacks, that is just there. Now compare that to India. You see, some people say, oh no, we have to have this ugly Hindu majoritarian show of power, we have to keep that down to protect the minorities. But are the minorities threatened? You see, what have Hindus ever done against the minority? And so here you have the comparison with the situation of the blacks in America. There has never been a time when the minorities in India and the non-Hindus in India were oppressed. There have been centuries when the Hindus were oppressed by the Muslims. There have been parts of India where they were oppressed by the Portuguese Christians, but vice versa has never been. There have been Muslims in Indo-India, there have been Christians in Indo-India, they have never been oppressed. So the Hindus do not owe them any compensation.